Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Gia Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of McCormick Seminary's Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education here in Chicago, Illinois.
And my name is Amanda Weber, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown Minneapolis. Westminster and McCormick are coming together to present Isolation in Perspective, Criminal Justice, Disconnection, and the Church.
And so this multi-week educational series seeks to explore the impact of COVID-19 on the carceral system and the role of the church in responding. Each week, we will feature a variety of speakers focusing on the topics of criminal justice, disconnection, and the church.
We invite you to join this conversation on Tuesday evenings, just like tonight here on Zoom at 6 p.m., or it will be rebroadcast every Sunday morning through Westminster's Adult Education live stream, which is at 9:15 a.m. And each week we begin each session with a grounding exercise, which helps us bring us more fully into the present moment so that we may receive all that this time has to offer and open ourselves to the discomfort of challenging topics and changing hearts. So Gia will guide us through that tonight.
Thank you, Amanda. So as Amanda mentioned, I will be guiding us this evening through our grounding practice. And before we get started, I want to just invite us just to share in a few moments of intentional silence in remembrance of those who are not able to be here with us in physical presence. So let us just remember our sisters and our brothers who are incarcerated in jails, prisons, and detention centers. Let us remember those who are the victims and survivors of organized and state-sanctioned violence. Let us remember those ancestors who we call upon for wisdom and guidance and strength, those life-giving ancestors. Let us sit in remembrance just for a few moments. So I'll be using story to ground and center our conversation on real people who are experiencing incarceration right now. And so today I'll be sharing the works of a student in McCormick's program for theological studies at Cook County Jail, which is part of the Solidarity Building Initiative. This summer, we offered a correspondence course on the topic of prison and abolition and a new social order that was designed to actually be a companion to this public education series. And so some of the students have given us permission to read their writing assignments. And so I'll be sharing the work anonymously, but I want to share just a little bit about the student that you'll get to know a little bit about today. I would characterize him as a quiet observer. He's usually the last to speak because he's listening attentively, he's processing, and he's observing the conversation. And when he speaks, he offers critical connections or insights that deepen or move the conversation forward. And so this essay that I'll be reading is in response to an interview in the New York Times Magazine between journalist Rachel Kushner and Ruth Wilson Gilmore. Gilmore is a renowned geographer, professor, and an influential figure in the prison abolition movement. And the article is Prison Necessary, Ruth Wilson Gilmore Might Change Your Mind. Kushner references a conversation on environmental justice where Gilmore was the keynote speaker. And so at this conference, there was a youth track in which children were meant to talk about their worries and then decide as a group what was most important to be done in the name of environmental justice. And well, when these kids, the youth, heard that Wilson was a prison abolitionist, well, they were a bit concerned and they wanted to meet Wilson because they had some questions. And so here's where the student in the Theological Studies program at Cook County Jail starts his essay. I was thinking like the middle school kids when they told Gilmore that they had heard that she was a prison abolitionist. One asked her, "You want to close prisons?" I felt like those kids because I grew up in a violent community and thought that in order for my community to get better, they should keep the bad people in jail for life. I felt like those children with questions like, what about the people who do something seriously wrong? What about the people that hurt other people? What about if someone kills someone? Then I ended up coming to jail for the same things that I was afraid of. I went to prison when I was only 17 years old. I'm in jail for the 4th time in my life, and this time is the longest that I've ever been locked up. It will be 3 years this August. Since I've been in jail, my eyes have been open to the injustices that are going on in jails and prisons. These laws are bogus and cruel. And so I agree with Gilmore. It does not take 10 to 20 years of incarceration before someone is ready to be back in their community after a harm has been committed. Right now, the justice system is giving out more time for an attempted murder than for a first-degree murder. Since I've been incarcerated over the last 3 years, I've seen it all. Just last week, a judge sentenced my childhood friend to 55 years for an attempted murder case. That's a hard pill to swallow. That's what I call cruelty. I watched them throw away people's lives with no remorse. I thought DOC stood for Department of Corrections, but instead of correcting someone, they want to take your life from you. I agree with Gilmore. What is actually needed are jobs, education, housing, and healthcare. What people need are the elements that are required for a productive, violence-free life. I say help people instead of giving cruel sentences. Let me put it this way. If you wouldn't want your kid behind bars, why would you put someone else's kid behind bars? And I'm talking to the judges, the lawmakers, the people in places of high influence and power. Would you want your kids in prison or jail? So as we prepare to be in conversation with a dynamic group of speakers, I invite you to hold these questions before you while listening for how God might be inviting you to co-labor in creating a world where people have more access to the resources that produce human flourishing rather than cruelty. So amen and ashe.
Good evening. Welcome. I'm Doug Mitchell, Associate Pastor Emeritus at Westminster Presbyterian in Minneapolis. And I'm going to be introducing the panelists and the moderator for this exciting evening. The moderator is Dr. Christoph D. Ringer, Associate Professor of Theological Ethics and Society at Chicago Theological Seminary. He received his PhD in Religion, Ethics, and Society from Vanderbilt University. His research interests include social ethics and public theology, African American religion and cultural studies, religion and politics. Ringer has published articles in Black Theology, an international journal, and the Journal of Africana Religions, and presented his research nationally and internationally, including at the American Academy of Religion. Ringer has taught courses at American Baptist College, New Brunswick Theological Seminary, and Christian Brothers University. He's the author of the forthcoming Necropolis and the Religious Crisis of U.S. Mass Incarceration. And our 3 panelists. First, Avalon Betts-Gaston is a Chicago native, a non-licensed attorney, ordained minister, and criminal legal system reform advocate. Avalon was wrongfully convicted in 2015 and sentenced to serve 57-month federal prison sentence. This experience has propelled her advocacy work to dramatically change the criminal legal system from start to finish. She received her bachelor's degree from DePaul University and her JD from John Marshall Law School in Chicago. She volunteers with criminal legal system advocacy groups locally, nationally, and statewide. She currently works for a media and entertainment company and is looking to expand the presence of women, especially women of color, as executive in that industry. Darryl Cooke is a nationally recognized speaker, author, and the founder of the Minds Over 9 workshop. This program focuses on decreasing gun violence and ending mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline. Mr. Cooke is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, He obtained his BSW in May 2014 and his MSW in May of 2018. He's certified in civic reflection, peace circle training, and restorative justice. Mr. Cooke has been in the social service field for over 7 years, specializing in cognitive behavior therapy and social emotional learning. He was a presenter at the Behind the Bars Forum at Columbia University in 2015 and worked in the Cook County Circuit Court ARI program. And finally, Josiah T. Ewing is a minister and PhD student whose life centers around the common threads of education, social work, and ministry. Josiah holds a Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and is in the process of completing a PhD in theology and ethics at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. He was awarded the Princeton Theological Seminary Religion and Society Fellowship in 2011 for his thesis, The Carceral and the Cannibal, which was based on his year-long chaplaincy at the Albert C. Wagner Youth Correctional Facility in Bordertown, New Jersey. It was there he first saw solitary confinement up close, and which sparked his current PhD work. So Christoph, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Doug. To all those who are joining us via Facebook, we thank you for being here for this important conversation. And my panelists have been gracious enough to allow me to be a little bit more informal. We've already had a chance to consecrate this space together. And what I'd like to do is to first go to Avalon. Avalon, as someone who has been impacted by this system, what do you want people to know about how isolation as a form of punishment affects people?
So we need to understand first that the system was created to produce isolation, right? That's the purpose of it. So they take you out of society and isolate you. Now, they will have you to believe that the purpose of that isolation is rehabilitation, but actually the purpose of that isolation is punishment. So everything in the criminal legal system is built on that premise of isolation as punishment. So all of the other pieces of the puzzle of the prison industrial complex actually are put together for that goal or for that end. For example, they generally, if you're talking about a federal situation, they send you as far away as they want to from your primary residence, knowing that that's going to impact your ability to have in-person visitations and things like that. And we know that in-person visitations is one of the primary things to help to produce a successful reentry. So staying in contact in community with your community is very critical to have a successful reentry. They also charge you for every form of communication. So that is another form of isolation, right? So they charge you for phone calls. They charge you for emails. They charge you for video visits. And they charge you, you have to pay for stamps to mail. So in every way that you can communicate and remain connected to your loved ones, there's a fee attached to it. And that in and of itself is a form of isolation. Above and beyond that, they limit how and when you can access your loved ones through email, through telephones, through visitations. Again, another form of isolation. So that we have to recognize that the system is intended to isolate, but is not intended to isolate with the purpose of reforming and rehabilitating people. It's intended to isolate with the primary purpose of punishing them as a way of trying to generate good behavior. And what it tends to do is cause more trauma and more emotional and mental distress. So it's actually counterproductive to what we really want to have accomplished in this system.
Could you follow up on one point that you mentioned about, cutting off communication? So can you talk a little bit about what that also does to the families of those who are incarcerated? Sometimes we hear this phrase of those who are doing time on the outside. Could you say a little bit about that?
Sure. So everyone in prison, for the most part, has someone outside that they are connected with, that they would consider a friend or a loved one. And part of your survival mechanism is maintaining that connection with those individuals, as a way of maintaining that you have purpose, because everything around you in that environment is telling you that you do not have value. So when you're connected to your community, you're connected to your loved ones, that is a way of reaffirming your humanness, because you're told and treated as if you're inhuman, or no longer human. So when you have when they put obstacles in the way of being able to maintain those connections, your family, they don't know what's going on with you. They don't know if you are hurt. They don't know if you are sick. They don't know if anything's okay. There were times when our email would just be shut off for no reason. Like, we would just not have access to email. And that was my primary form of communication with my loved ones on the outside. And the response would be, once we got reconnected, it's like, are you okay? So the stress and the distress that it causes your loved ones back at home is compounded by the fact that you can't communicate with them to tell them that I'm okay, because they worry about your well-being. They worry about just your mental, your emotional, your physical well-being. And when they can't hear from you, it causes additional stress for your loved ones.
Thank you. Josiah, given your work around solitary confinement, and given your engagement with the life of the church and your theological background, do you think our congregations aware of their legacy as it relates to solitary confinement? Have churches really wrestled with the theological aspects of what this practice means, what we are complicit in?
Thank you. Definitely not, Reverend Dr. Ringer, definitely not. I think what you would see at some of the more like progressive and aware churches, so to speak, is a prison ministry. They'll send out some letters, maybe they'll send out food around Christmas time or Thanksgiving time, some gift cards or like greeting cards, but really wrestling with how our own tradition, how the tradition itself, this idea that isolating people was somehow going to lead to a kind of redemption, has roots going back centuries and even thousands of years. And devoid of its agency, because in the 3rd and 4th century you have the desert fathers and mothers in Egypt and in northern Africa who go out purposefully to get away from the city's kind of influences, because there's to avoid temptation, so to speak. But this idea later, especially around the time of the Revolutionary War, gets picked up by the founders, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, Tench Coxe, so many others who form societies that then say explicitly, we are going to save these people if we put them by themselves, if we remove them from everyone. And I wish I could say that not much has changed in our policy, but if you look around the world, even at other countries that incarcerate people, you will see that solitary confinement is as American as baseball. It is a unique, peculiar institution, and it has roots not only in our political and economic institutions, but I would also say our religious. So we need to really take a deep excavation, I would say, of not just what our practices are doing, but how are our very ideas promoting and encouraging these practices.
Could you say a little bit about what you might think as a kind of public witness in this moment? What might a practice of repentance look like from the church, right? How once we confront this legacy of our involvement in solitary confinement, what does a kind of practice of repentance look like?
Oh man, well, I mean, it would be, number one, it wouldn't be just one thing. I mean, you have churches who are profiting off of private prisons. They are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars every year that they need to divest those funds immediately. There's also the way that even the church space is policed. People coming inside churches, and if they don't have this suit or they don't look like the rest of the congregation, then immediately being suspected. Unfortunately, the issue, you would think, given Christians' devotion to a man who was condemned and crucified for being a felon of the highest sort in the Roman Empire, you think we might have more of a sympathy, at the very least, for people who are felons or who have done some time themselves. And that, I mean, I can't help but read the Bible anymore, Christoph, and see from Moses to Jesus, these are criminals, but they are also heroes. And in a similar way, I think, so divesting from funds, welcoming, spending, going beyond just, we'll throw you some token greeting cards, truly breaking those barriers down and going inside the church, living into that, that what Jesus tells the disciples. Do you want to know if you're one of my followers? You go to people in prison. You do certain things. So visiting with people, and like Avalon so expertly said, in-person visitations, just caring and spending time to visit with someone, maybe who you don't know, who's not a part of your family, could be the thing that helps them hang on to a sense of life and purpose.
Thank you. So, Darryl, we've heard in different ways the impact of misconceptions, myths about isolation as a form of punishment. Given your background, can you think in terms of the conversations that are happening right now around policing, abolition, incarceration? What are some kind of distorted ways of thinking, right, that you've encountered that really keep mass incarceration, that exasperates mass incarceration? What are the kind of forms of thinking that you find to be the most concerning?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for moderating this conversation that we're having right now. It's truly necessary. Thank you for my other panelists. You all spoke so eloquently now about the topic that we're having. I think that we have a lot of misconceptions as far as those who are incarcerated, to where we feel as though, okay, and everyone who goes to prison belongs there. And the sentence that you received was just. And I'm okay. I feel safe now. You're incarcerated. You're where you belong. Deal with it. Whatever happens, it happens. You get out. Magically, you're back out here and everything is okay. I think the misconception is that when we do that, that everything will be okay. And we blame the individual who went through the system versus blaming the system. Listen, I want to go to a question, if I may entangle this. I know it wasn't my question, it was Avalon's, but we talked about isolation. What do I have to say about that? As a person who was incarcerated for 10 years, I want to say that isolation is traumatizing. It was traumatizing. I know we have to do something with people who commit heinous crimes, but isolation in itself is traumatizing, right? Just think, and what you lose when you're isolated is the ability to use your communication skills. You lose the ability to have interaction. You lose those skills. So when you come out, you look aggressive. You look stressed. You look like, I'm a social worker. I do assessments. Some of these things that you see, you may put as symptoms as mood disorders or dysregulation, when really it's trauma. When really it's trauma that we're talking about right now, right? And it's funny, when I think about this, I think about when I went to New York to speak on this. And when we spoke behind the bars forum, what they had was interesting. They have virtual reality glasses. And in those virtual reality glasses, you could pull up 6x9 cell. And they didn't make it mandatory, but People who were coming to hear us speak that day had the opportunity to put the goggles on and be in a cell for 6 minutes. And I'm telling you, there were people there that were taking the goggles off in 2 minutes because you feel it. You can hear the officer's keys banging. You can hear the baton hitting the cell. You can hear a cell close. And Avalon knows just as well as I do. A cell closing has a distinct sound to it that you will never forget for the rest of your life. So it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing in all its ways. I look at my mom when she came home from prison, right? She came to live in my house for a while, right? And just to see the effects of trauma, I was like, Mom, this your room, welcome home. Hey, this is the bathroom, front, kitchen, our room here. And do you know, my mom will not leave her room unless she has to go to the restroom or somebody comes to visit her. She still had to let it sink in that the whole house is available to her. She thinks she has to stay inside her room because that's the trauma that jail gives us when we're incarcerated. So I just wanted to add on saying that people that's incarcerated, I think we should stop treating that in totality as a criminal problem and understand that it is a mental health issue, right? And to talk about incarceration, I just want to speak on to the fact that Mr. Ewing said, right? We talked about people incarcerated in the United States. Think about the fact that we all know these numbers, but think about the fact that we're only 5% of the world's population. But we incarcerate 1/4 of the world's population. We have 25% of all people that are incarcerated and imprisoned in this world are right here in the United States. Now, I know I went to a public school, right? But I know shorthand math, right? And what I'm saying is, in one of my favorite books, in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that my brother Dr. Kirk James told me about, it says in there that no society or country can call themselves or consider themselves 100% humane while stopping somebody else from having the same privileges.
Right. So I want to make some connections with the realities of COVID-19. But before I go there, I don't want to miss this opportunity. Avalon and Darryl, if you could just say briefly, if you were to design or redesign prison ministry for today, right? Because part of what I want us to think about is what happens when we think about prison ministry from the perspective of those who have experienced incarceration, right? If you were to say to churches, here are the 2 or 3 things that need to ground your ministry as it relates to issues of incarceration, what would that be for you?
So the first thing needs to be, I think the focus needs to be changed from this perspective of we're coming in to save you, right? We're coming in to save you. We're good, you're bad, we're coming to save you. Like that's the pretense upon which most prison ministries operate. I'm just going to be honest. And so turn away from that and look more as, okay, how can I do this process with you? And how can I help you through it? Because the vast majority of people in prison are coming home. So I want to help you now, but I also want to help you later. So how can I be a part of your existence as it is right now, incarcerated, and then continue that relationship well beyond the time that you leave this particular institution? And I understand that there are few actual volunteers. And the need is great. I hear my Savior saying that he was saddened because the need was so great. And that is true as well with prison ministry. The need is great, but don't just leave them at the gate's door. Be a part of their reentry. Be a part of them being reunited with society. So help them while they're away to not be or feel isolated, but then also help them. Don't isolate them once they come home.
Nice. Very well said. First of all, I just want to start on, complimenting the church on a lot of the work that they do.
Oh, absolutely.
So I know we both recognize that, right? We both have seen people that never get letters, and today they got a letter, And it was like, yo, this church rolled me, yo. They reached out to me, bro. Somebody know I'm here, man. I'm like, okay, bro, that's what's up, man. I'm glad you got a letter. I'm like, you gonna write back? Like, yeah, I'm gonna go to Child first, man. We get back from Child, I'm gonna go to the yard, then I'm gonna write them back, man, because they ain't have to write me, man. They don't even know me, man. They reached out. So thank you all for the continued work that you're doing, Josiah, and everyone who's continue that work, because it's so important, because we have so many people in there, especially we still have people, think about this, we still have people locked up in the Illinois Department of Correction that has C numbers still. Man, that means they've been locked up for like 30 years and they keep going to the parole board and they keep getting denied, but they have no family to go home to if you let them go. So they really don't even have an incentive to come inside there and they advocate for themselves to the fullest. I always think about Shawshank Redemption with that, like, this has been home from them. So maybe if we can work on those numbers as well, the C numbers, A numbers, if we can start with our brothers and sisters who've been there for that amount of time, that would help. And the second thing that I think would help before I get to the point that Avalon made, because that's absolutely right, you want to follow them home. Here's what I think. I think that for me, for most men who was incarcerated, if you ask them what was the hardest part about being incarcerated, they would say being away from my family, specifically my children. So what if the church was able to build that alliance with the person that was incarcerated and say, hey, do you have children that may need a support system? And maybe the church can have an open space for what I call CHIP, which is children who have incarcerated parents, because we have funds for everything, mental health awareness, we have funds, you know, educational, but we have no funds set aside for children who grow up with the automatic trauma of, one, being African-American in this country, and two, having an incarcerated parent. If we could create a space for them, I think that would be awesome. And number three, what I want you to do is hold them accountable. We need a course of action out of you. We writing you, this is what we expect. And when you give them that, I'm telling you, that humanizes them. Because they're like, okay, you expect something great from me? What? I'm about to do this. You know what? I ain't never thought about doing this, but I'm gonna do this now, right? You know, because it's important. Because think about something that brings pride to you, like expectation. People, like I saw this janitor that worked across the street from my school, and I'll pass the microphone. His name was Mr. Scales. Every day after school was over, he would speak to me. But every time I see him, he would be making so much noise because his key ring was this big, right? And he had 100 keys on there. I was like, Mr. Scales, why do you have so many keys on you? And he said, oh, young fella, that's because so many people trust me with so many things. And in jail, the thing that you're deprived of is a set of keys. In fact, you have to close the jail cell behind yourself. So to get a set of keys will make a person feel alive. For you to hold somebody accountable and say, I expect this from you, will keep a person alive as well.
Thank you. So, Josiah, given your work both with those who are experiencing solitary, but also as a pastor, right? You're active in ministry. Given what we're going through with COVID-19, are there things that you've seen that essentially society might need to learn from those who have been incarcerated about what it means to get through this moment? As a nation, we seem to be struggling with not being able to do what we want to do, not being able to shelter in place. Well, what are you thinking about in terms of, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I was reading, I would encourage everyone to go, if you haven't checked it out already, solitarywatch.org. They have a regular section on their Voices from Solitary. And I was reading some of the recent posts that were made by people. And a recurring kind of theme that came up was both an excitement that for perhaps in 40, 50 years, there's a kind of newfound push to look at solitary again as being a torture, and not just torture, but one that should be abolished, ended. And there's this greater push. So there was an excitement, and it's like, hey, you know, people are like, you're stuck in your apartment. You're stuck, you know, like this isn't easy. But at the same time, there was also Do you understand how much you still have?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand that you're still able most likely to talk to your friends and loved ones and family? That you still have all this agency, even being able to open your door. You know, I think when Malcolm, after he got out of prison, in the autobiography, he's talking about how he's just opening and closing a door for a while, going in and out of it, just taking that in. So there's so many things, those of us who are cramped, I mean, like myself, admittedly, cramped up, feeling the pain of isolation, being away from my loved ones, everything that goes with it, not being able to leave. And yet still that not being a drop in the bucket compared to the kind of pain and torturous isolation that's going on in solitary. And I just want to say this because we have the numbers, they don't give us exact numbers, but it's believed there's somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 people in solitary at any time in the US. You know, this is more than some countries put in their jails to begin with. Wow. But just in June of this year, a special report was released looking at the impact of the pandemic on prisons. And it showed that now the number of prisoners who are being held confined to their cell, often denied access to go leave for meals and other things, even denied access to talk to their friends and family, is estimated to be over 300,000. And that's a conservative estimate. I don't believe, just personally, I always think it's higher most likely than what they're reporting, but their own reporting is that over 300,000 people now. And you know, like Avalon was saying, this is an institution. This isn't just simply a kind of, we're doing this every now and then. Entire prisons, 44 states have entire prisons that are built around solitary confinement. That is their very purpose. And every single state has facilities in their prisons where they can isolate and segregate people. So COVID-19 has drastically exacerbated this problem. And, you know, but I don't want to discourage that momentum either. I mean, it is a link. It is a link that I think we need to encourage, you know, being concerned about isolation.
And I'll throw this out to all the panelists. When COVID-19 first hit, there's a lot of energy really pushing hard for decarceration, mass release, right? And one of the key arguments was that it's not going to just affect those who are currently in jails or prison. It will affect staff, right? It will affect those who are coming back into communities, right? But yet it was still very difficult really for people to grasp that we can't flatten the curve or really get past this pandemic without serious decarceration. And so I just want to get a sense from you, maybe we'll begin with Avalon. How do we chart this path to really keep people focused on this relationship between prisons and the pandemic?
Well, so thank you for that question. I actually was still in prison when COVID hit. So I was actually still in prison. And the fear that just infiltrated the facility was, you could feel it. The tension was so thick that it was physically like debilitating, where the fear and the tension was so thick. And the response by the facility was, what we're going to do is we're going to isolate you further. So now we're going to lock you down all 24 hours a day. So now you can't go out and I'll say that I was at a minimum security facility. So we could go out if we wanted to and walk the track. We weren't in a facility where we could not have free movement. Limited, but you know, we could move. We can go to the rec, we could do a lot of different things. And now their response was, we're going to lock you in your housing units 24 hours a day. We're going to feed you bologna sandwiches every day for weeks on end. And anytime we have a scare with regards to a possible or positive COVID case, we're going to cut off all your communications and your televisions. So we're going to isolate you even further because someone has tested positive in your housing unit. And so just think of the trauma. I'm already afraid of getting this disease. And I don't have any control over who comes into my space. I don't have personal space. It doesn't exist in prison. So I can't control who comes into my space. I can't even control how you come into my space. I can't demand that an officer wear a mask. I can't demand that an officer puts on gloves. I can't make any demands on this person who is a physical threat to my health, because that officer is the one going out into the community and then coming back. So they have a higher likelihood of contracting COVID-19 than we did. And so if we could keep everybody out, we would be safe. The problem is that that's not possible. Once you have a case, you have an outbreak. They are contemporaneous with each other because one case means an outbreak within a prison, because there is no social distancing in prison. You could touch in where I slept. I literally could put my arm out and literally touch my bunkie. So there was no physical separation between us as we slept. And then I was one of the ones in the preferred housing because there was only 2 people in my sleeping space, whereas other women had to have 3 people in their sleeping space. So you can even, but it's the same size. We just go from 2 to 3 people. So it's not like it got bigger. We just crammed more people in it. So it was really, it was already stressful enough. The unknowns about this disease and all of those type of things, we have zero control over we have no personal space, and we have zero control over who can enter into that space. And then your response is, we're gonna cut you off from everyone and everything. And somehow that is supposed to make you safe when the very threat is walking in and out of your building.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. I mean, you got me thinking right now. I have to pause before I start speaking. I know I heard you correctly when you said you were locked up when the pandemic hit, and that definitely made me pause because I understood the situation, how dire it was. I remember seeing the news flashes of men writing "help me" on the glass inside the county, and we talking about people who, in most cases have accepted the fact, okay, I'm in this position, it is what it is, I'm gonna deal with it, you know what I'm saying? And they write "help me" like in the glass. And all it made me do was go back to when I got locked up. I remember getting locked up, fighting my case, and being in Cook County in Division 6. And for those who have never been or have never been on the tour, have never seen them, and Division 6 is like 2 decks. And you have 10 cells at the bottom, you have 10 cells at the top. You have 2 bunks inside, but if crime escalates like it sometimes usually does, unfortunately, in Chicago, that doesn't mean that they stop locking people up. Right. What they do is take a sponge mattress and they lay it down on the floor inside the 2-man cell. So now you have 3 men. I've been that man on several occasions that slept on a green sponge mattress. And after you fill all 20 of those cells up, then you have a deck where we eat food and a bottom deck to where you can just get away for a second and go pray. There's people sleeping down there, coming in 10, 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Some may be dealing with substance abuse and alcohol problems. People are walking in on a daily basis with COVID, asymptomatic. And as my sister just said now, officers are going home every day. And do we know the numbers of that, or how many officers have contracted, COVID? And where did they catch it? Was it in Saco County or was it at home and that type of population? And the people who were incarcerated had no choice but to deal with you when you came in tomorrow. I'm stuck. Can't move. You got my life in your hands right now. I don't know what you going out there doing. I know I'm wrong for what I did, but oh my goodness, I might lose my life. And so this is why it was so important. And think about this, the isolation, the farther and farther you go into isolation, the farther and farther you get away from the sun. The farther and farther you get away from the light. You're in a dungeon. Isn't that how it breeds? You know, so, you know, to be isolated like that, I think one thing that jail and being incarcerated has taught us, and everybody has had a taste of it now, is that one, it is traumatizing. It is traumatizing, and we should work on ways to kind of resolve some of those, because this is all new to us. We should at least take a look at what we can do to make prison systems safer for our young men and women who are catching crimes at an early point in their life and possibly paying for the rest of their lives.
Thank you. Josiah, did you have, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna add on top of that. I mean, you know, in addition to social distancing not even being a possibility, you know, I've also been hearing of, you know, in 5-foot hallways, people who can't be 6 feet apart getting a disciplinary ticket written on them and being sent to solitary precisely because they had now another rule to follow in the what is already a labyrinthian set of rules that's almost constantly changing. So and just what Darryl was saying with the vitamin D deficiency, I mean, people without access to light and air and deprived of the ability to move. I mean, Dr. Stuart Grasson, who is on Harvard's medical faculty in 1993, he was interviewing and observing prisoners at Pelican Bay. And he identified what was called SHU syndrome, you know, based on the SHU, or security housing units, or just the SHU as it's called, but SHU syndrome and hallucinations, nightmares, paranoia and obsession, but also health problems. So it's people who are made particularly vulnerable already by a society that is disenfranchising them, now being stuck into a situation that is literally killing them. It was Dr. I think Huda Akil in 2014 from the University of Michigan, who said the brain literally shrivels in solitary. It is the space, the duration of time, the environment is literally destructive and killing the person's body, mind, and soul. So yeah, putting people in there, it's just an additional, it's like an incubator. It's making things worse. It's leading to more death and more sickness.
And I'm sorry, Pastor, I'd just like to add that the response by the prison system has been to say, we are going to protect those people who have tested positive for COVID-19 by putting them in solitary confinement. So I'm going to make you better somehow by making you worse. And that mindset, but I can only believe that if I honestly believe that you're not human, that you don't suffer trauma for being put in solitary confinement. If I feel like some kind of animal, then I can honestly justify in my mind that I'm helping you by putting you into solitary confinement because I'm protecting you and protecting the other people from you. And I'm disregarding the actual atmosphere that solitary confinement is. And that's the really kind of, to me, the really bad part about it is that they're using it now as a protection, which they've done that in the past. This is just shining a light on a practice that has been done. Just really quickly, in women's facilities, sexual misconduct is very prevalent in female facilities. And they would protect the victim by putting her in solitary confinement. So she would get sent to the SHU to be in protective custody. and that's how they would protect them. So this ill thought use of solitary confinement it didn't start with COVID. It just blew up with COVID.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes, and Avalon said something regarding just the level of fear that those who are incarcerated are experiencing in this moment. And that also had me thinking about, so on the one hand, you have those who are incarcerated and those fears and the depth of those fears. And then those in society who are fearful of decarceration, right? Communities fearful of government officials who care nothing about their children, their livelihoods, et cetera. And so as it relates to faith communities, in just our final minutes, what is the courageous risk of faith that we need to take in this moment? If there's some of faith communities say, you know what, we have to step up and really kind of risk something, right? Not be beholden to multiple fears on every side. What would it be?
I think it's that we have to believe in every individual and not throw some people away, like regardless of the crimes that take place. Mm-hmm. And I want to speak directly to the people that you were saying that may be afraid of, like the incarceration and letting people out. Like I really wanted to sink in that each year in Illinois, like they need to know that 70,000 people come home each year from prison. Right? Like anyway.
Right.
So which side would you want to be on? Would you want to be on the side that helps them, gives them the resources to be able to go further and live that dream and change their lifestyle? Or be on the side that says, hey, you know what? Let's just go ahead, leave them incarcerated, and when they get out, whatever happens, happens. We talked about that earlier, right? We see the effects of that. Earlier when we started this conversation, and we didn't mention this yet, but I want to go to it. Gia she read a statement from a young man that was locked up, that was on his 4th bid, locked up for 3 years, and he talked about over-sentencing, like being real, right? And I just want to say, let's not forget about them. Let's understand that it has affected him traumatically, right? And I think when we work toward the greater goal of having everybody in a peaceful state, the better we move away from the isolation state is best. It's best. I can't sum that up any better. It's best. Move away from isolation.
Thank you.
And I think I want to borrow a phrase from Brian Stevenson, who I admire and very much in the work that he does in the system, but become proximate. Like, let go of your fears and your reservations and your preconceived notions about who are in prison, and become proximate to the problem. You can't understand how the church can be involved if you're doing it from afar. You have to get up close and personal and touch and listen and hear and heal the people who are involved in that system. And that will help you to usher in change.
I would say too, and Avalon, alluded to this earlier, you're not bringing salvation to the place. I think a call to faith communities would be, we must save ourselves. We must save our communities, our families, by enacting these changes. Because while the voices of the people in solitary in prison may not echo beyond the walls, I do believe they echo up to a God who still cries for justice, a God who still demands this as our right worship. So I would say specifically to Christians, since that's my faith community that I am a part of, it is a biblical mandate. And Jesus makes it clear, as Avalon was saying, he will be found there. The presence of God is already there. We must, if we want to save our very souls, do this change.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And just in closing, I want to thank our panelists. This conversation, I think, has brought us one step closer to that horizon of abolition. And I think for faith communities, we have to understand that the practice of isolation right, actually distorts our thinking about each other, about ourselves, and about our faith. So once again, thank you all for your time and sharing so generously of your experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
No
you.
problem. Thank you all.
Thank you all.